They thought firing me was the end of the conversation. They were wrong. It was the beginning of their education. The announcement came on a Tuesday, November 15th, at 4:17 p.m. I remember the time because the digital clock on the conference room wall was flickering, one of the LED bars on the final digit dead, making the 7 look like a 1. It was a small thing, a piece of failing infrastructure nobody had bothered to fix. A perfect metaphor. My name is Owen Harper. I'm 43 years old. For 28 of those years, I was the director of logistics for Sterling Global Solutions, a company I helped build from a regional distributor into a 9-figure international player. I didn't just work there. I grew up there. Brent Sterling Sr., the CEO and a man I once respected, cleared his throat. The sound was thin in the stale, overconditioned air. He couldn't meet my eye. He was staring at a spot on the mahogany table somewhere between my coffee mug and my clasped hands. "Owen," he started, his voice a weak imitation of authority. As we pivot toward a more dynamic, future-facing operational paradigm, the board and I have decided to instill new leadership in the operations division. He said paradigm, like he'd just learned the word that morning. He was 68 years old and had spent the last 5 years letting his golf handicap dictate his business strategy. To his right, his son, Brent Sterling Jr., smirked. The smirk was the kind you see on a man who has never once in his life faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. At 29, with a freshly printed MBA and a resume padded with vanity projects his father had funded, he was being named Vice President of Operations. My boss. The job I had been promised for the last 3 years. The job for which I was the only qualified candidate on the planet. Brent Jr. was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. An Audemars Piguet watch, the Royal Oak model worth about $60,000, hung loosely on his wrist. It was a gaudy piece of hardware that screamed new money and old insecurity. He straightened his tie and leaned into the microphone embedded in the table. "I'm really excited to synergize with the team," he said, the words sloshing around in his mouth like cheap wine. "We're going to disrupt the traditional logistics flow and leverage our core competencies for maximum impact." It was a meaningless word salad, assembled from a textbook he'd probably paid someone else to read for him. They slid a folder across the table. It contained the new organizational chart. My name was still there, Director of Logistics, but now indented under a new box labeled Brent Sterling Jr., VP of Operations. It was a public castration. They weren't just denying me the promotion. They were rubbing my face in it. They were making sure everyone in the company knew the bloodline was more important than performance. My knuckles turned white where I gripped my pen. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the flickering clock. 4:19 p.m. But here's what they didn't know. They thought my loyalty was a line item on their balance sheet, an asset they owned. They never understood that in logistics, the real assets aren't the trucks, the warehouses, or the software. The real assets are the relationships. They are forged at 3 a.m. on a frozen tarmac in Anchorage, in a handshake over lukewarm tea in a Shenzhen factory, in a favor called in to get the last container on a ship leaving Rotterdam. These relationships were mine. I built them. I owned them. And the signature on the document that would ruin them was already dry. If you like stories about competence getting its revenge on arrogance, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel because the bill for this particular education was about to come due, and the tuition was going to be astronomical. 2 days before the humiliation, I was sitting in my office reviewing freight manifests. My history with Sterling Global started in 1994. I was 15, hired for a summer job sweeping the warehouse floors for $4.25 an hour. The place was a fraction of its current size then, just one dusty building and a handful of trucks. Brent Sr. was a different man back then, still hungry, his sleeves rolled up, driving a forklift himself when a shipment was late. I respected that man. I worked for that man. After that summer, I stayed on, working weekends and holidays. I learned to drive a forklift at 16. At 18, instead of college, I took a full-time position as a dispatcher. I memorized every route, every driver's preference, every customer's dockside quirks. I learned the rhythm of the road, the hum of the warehouse, the delicate dance of getting a box from point A to point B efficiently. I didn't have a degree in supply chain management. I had a doctorate earned in grease, diesel fumes, and caffeine. The years piled up. I was promoted to planner, then manager, then, 12 years ago, director of logistics. I gave them everything. In 2008, my daughter Sarah had her first ballet recital. She was 8. I had a front row ticket in my pocket, but a wildcat strike at the Port of Oakland threatened a $12 million shipment of electronics for our biggest client at the time. I spent 36 hours straight on the phone, rerouting every container through the Port of Seattle, chartering a fleet of trucks, and personally coordinating with the Teamsters local to get our cargo moved. I saved the contract. I missed the recital. My wife sent me a grainy cell phone video of my daughter in her tutu, looking for me in the crowd. In 2015, my son's soccer team made it to the state finals. I was the assistant coach. The game was on a Saturday. That Friday night, a volcano erupted in Iceland, grounding all air traffic over the North Atlantic. We had critical medical components on a flight from Frankfurt to Chicago. Without them, a production line would shut down, costing our client $250,000 per hour. I spent the entire weekend in a makeshift command center in my office, coordinating with a Russian cargo operator to fly the parts over the North Pole via Anchorage. The parts arrived Monday morning at 6 a.m. I missed the game. My son's team lost in penalty kicks. My 15th wedding anniversary. A blizzard in Buffalo. A multi-million-dollar contract for automotive parts. I spent the night on a cot in a freezing warehouse, making sure the generators stayed on so the temperature-sensitive components wouldn't be ruined. I ate a gas station burrito for my anniversary dinner. The sacrifices were my investment in the company, my sweat equity. I built their logistics network from scratch. I negotiated the contracts. I cultivated the vendors. Sterling Global's reputation for reliability wasn't because of their branding. It was because of my cell phone, which was never turned off. Then came Brent Sterling Jr. He was the antithesis of everything I'd learned. He saw logistics as a video game, a series of numbers on a screen to be optimized. He didn't understand the people. He'd walk through the warehouse in his pristine Italian loafers, looking at the men and women working the floor like they were inconvenient obstacles. He talked about disintermediating legacy vendors and onboarding scalable partners through a cloud-based portal. He wanted to replace handshakes with algorithms. He saw my relationships not as assets to be nurtured, but as inefficiencies to be eliminated. His first major initiative was to demand we renegotiate all our freight contracts to a net 90 payment term to improve free cash flow. I tried to explain to him that the reason we got preferential treatment, the reason Maria Rodriguez from Port Express Trucking would divert a truck from a competitor to handle our last-minute load, was because we paid our bills in 15 days, not 90. We were reliable. We were good partners. He waved me off. They need us more than we need them, Owen. That's business. He didn't get it. Maria didn't need us. She had a fleet of 200 trucks and a waiting list of clients. She worked with us because 20 years ago, when she was starting her company with one used truck and a mountain of debt, I convinced Brent Sr. to give her a chance and guarantee her first major contract. Loyalty. He thought it was a one-way street. The secret weapon wasn't a document or a clause in a contract. It was a philosophy, taught to me by my first mentor, Sal Moretti. Back in 2013, I was working on a complex deal with a new shipping partner. I had everything documented, every contingency planned for. Sal, who was the warehouse manager then and had been with the company for 40 years, pulled me aside. He was a gruff, Old school guy with oil permanently stained under his fingernails. He looked at my binders and spreadsheets and just grunted. "This is all paper, kid," he said, tapping a thick file. "Paper burns. Computers crash. The company can own the paper. They can't own what's in here." He tapped his temple. "And they can't own the handshake. You make a promise to a guy, you look him in the eye, and you keep it. You do a guy a favor when he's in a jam. He never forgets. That's the real network. The paperwork belongs to the company. The handshakes belong to you. Don't ever forget that." That advice became my operating manual. My network wasn't in the corporate CRM. It was in my head and in my gut. It was Kenji Tanaka at Pacific Rim Shipping in Osaka. We met in 2005 during a tense negotiation. The talks had stalled. One evening, we discovered a shared obsession with vintage Kawasaki motorcycles. We spent the next 3 hours talking about engine displacements and carburetor tuning, not container rates. The next day, the deal was done. For the next 17 years, whenever I needed a container on a full ship, Kenji found one. It wasn't in the contract. It was in the conversation about the 74 Z1-900. It was David Chen, the factory manager for Apex Manufacturing in Shenzhen. In 2010, we had a quality control crisis. A batch of 50,000 units was potentially defective. A recall would have cost millions and ruined our relationship with a major retailer. Instead of handling it over email, I was on a plane 12 hours later. I spent 2 days on his factory floor, working with his team, sleeping in a spare office, helping them sort the inventory piece by piece. We isolated the problem to a single defective machine. We saved the shipment. David and I cemented a bond built on mutual respect and shared exhaustion. He gave Sterling Global his best pricing and first priority on production runs, not because of the contract, but because I showed up. These weren't vendors. They were partners. They were my partners. Sterling Global was just the name on the invoice. Brent Jr., with his MBA and his buzzwords, was about to learn that you can't download a lifetime of trust from the cloud. The catalyst for my departure wasn't the promotion itself. It was the insult that followed. A week after the announcement, Brent Jr. called me into his new, obscenely large office. He had replaced the modest furniture with a glass desk and white leather chairs that looked like they belonged on a spaceship. He was pacing, holding a tablet. "Owen, I've been running some numbers through the new optimization software," he began, not making eye contact. "Our route from the Dallas warehouse to our client in Denver is inefficient. It's adding 4% to our fuel costs." I knew the route he meant. I designed it myself 8 years ago. "The software is right. In a perfect world," I explained calmly. "But the software doesn't account for the seasonal crosswinds on I-80 through Wyoming in the winter, which can lead to rollovers and delays. It also doesn't know that the state patrol on that stretch is notorious for pulling over trucks for minor infractions. The southern route through New Mexico is slightly longer, but it's safer and more reliable. Over the long term, it's cheaper because we avoid accidents, tickets, and late delivery penalties." He scoffed, finally looking at me. "That sounds like old school anecdotal thinking. We need to be data-driven. The algorithm says the northern route is better. We're changing it. Make it happen." It wasn't a discussion. It was a decree. I didn't argue. I just nodded. "Okay, Brent." It wasn't rage. It was a decision. The switch had been flipped. My loyalty to Sterling Global, already hanging by a thread, was severed completely. His next move was the grand, predictable error of the arrogant. He composed an email. It was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense, addressed to our entire vendor list, my entire network. The subject line was Strategic Partnership Realignment for Enhanced Synergies. In it, he introduced himself as the new VP of Operations and informed them that, effective immediately, all payment terms would be shifted to net 90 to optimize our cash flow and align with industry best practices. He also announced a new automated vendor portal where they would have to upload their invoices and track payments, replacing the direct contacts they had in our accounting department. He was replacing human relationships with a faceless bureaucratic firewall. He CC'd his father and me on the email. He probably thought it made him look decisive and modern. To me, it looked like a beautifully written suicide note. He had just handed me the ammunition I needed. For the next 2 weeks, I operated in 2 modes. During the day, I was the compliant defeated director. I forwarded his routing change order to the Dallas dispatchers, as instructed. I answered his foolish questions, but at night, my home office became a war room. I wasn't stealing company secrets. I was compiling a record of my own value and his incompetence. I systematically forwarded every one of Brent Jr.'s emails to my personal Gmail account, the one about the payment terms, the one about the disastrous route change, his condescending memos about key performance indicators. I created a folder titled The Education of Brent Jr. I also logged into the HR portal and downloaded my last 15 years of performance reviews. Every single one rated me exceeds expectations. I printed the commendation letter from Brent Sr. himself after I saved the Port of Oakland contract, the one where he called me the cornerstone of our operational success. I wasn't just building a case. I was building an arsenal. The payback came 6 months later, but the seeds were planted that night. I opened my old-fashioned, leather-bound Rolodex, the one Sal would have approved of. I didn't need the company's CRM. Maria's cell number was in there. So was Kenji's direct line in Osaka and David's private number in Shenzhen. These were numbers you couldn't find on a website. They were numbers earned over decades. I placed my resignation letter, a simple 2-sentence document, in my briefcase. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. My last day was unceremonious. I walked into Brent Sr.'s office and handed him my resignation. I gave the standard 2 weeks' notice. He and Brent Jr. were both there. They didn't look surprised. They looked smug. They thought I was bluffing, trying to leverage a counteroffer. Brent Sr. barely glanced at the letter. "We accept your resignation, effective immediately, Owen," he said, his tone cold. "We'll have security escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." It was a petty power play, designed to humiliate me. It was also their single greatest tactical error. By denying me the 2-week transition period, they cut themselves off from the one person who could have navigated the storm they were about to enter. They had just thrown their only map overboard. A silent security guard watched me pack 28 years of my life into a single cardboard box. The photos of my kids, a collection of model trucks, a framed photo of me and Sal Moretti from his retirement party. As I walked out of the building for the last time, the guard, a guy named Frank I'd known for years, shook my hand quietly. "Good luck, Owen," he said. "They're fools." He was right. That same evening, I went home, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat on my back porch. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt a profound sense of calm, the calm of a commander before a well-planned battle. Then I picked up my personal cell phone and started making calls. My first call was to Maria Rodriguez. It was 7 p.m. I knew she'd still be in her office. "Maria, it's Owen Harper." "Owen, how are you?" she said, her voice warm. "I'm good, Maria. Listen, I'm calling to let you know I'm no longer with Sterling Global. I submitted my resignation today." There was a pause on the line. I didn't fill it. I let her process it. "Well," she said finally, "that's the end of an era. That place is going to fall apart without you. Did you see that email from the kid?" I smiled. "I did." "Net 90, she scoffed. "He can try. My trucks don't move for anyone past net 30. So, what's next for you?" "I'm starting as VP of Operations at Apex Logistics next week," I told her. Another pause. This one shorter. "Apex, huh? They're a good outfit. You send me their credit application. I'll approve it myself." We'll give you our preferred rates. I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to poach. I just had to exist. I appreciate that, Maria. It's been a pleasure working with you all these years. The pleasure was mine, Owen. You call me when you're settled in. My next call was to Japan. It was morning there. Kenji Tanaka answered on the second ring. The conversation was almost identical. I informed him of my departure. He expressed his disappointment with the new direction at Sterling, referencing the impersonal email from Brent Jr. He wished me well and, without any prompting, said, "Let me know where you land, Owen-san. My best container rates will follow you." The final call was to David Chen in Shenzhen. He was blunt. "Owen, my friend, that new boy at your company is an amateur. He doesn't understand guanxi. He doesn't understand respect. My factory's capacity is suddenly very limited for Sterling Global. But for you, we always have capacity." I took the next week off. It was the first full week I'd had off in over a decade. I went to my son's soccer practices. I had dinner with my wife every night. I felt the tension of the last 28 years begin to drain out of my shoulders. On the following Monday, I started at Apex Logistics. They were smaller than Sterling, but they were smart, aggressive, and they understood that logistics was a people business. They gave me a corner office, a significant pay raise, and most importantly, equity. For the first time, I wasn't just an employee, I was an owner. The first whispers of trouble at Sterling reached me about 10 days after I left. A friend in the industry called me. "What's going on with your old company?" he asked. "Their biggest client, AeroCorp, is screaming. A critical shipment of landing gear components from China is stuck at the port of Long Beach. They're going to have to shut down an assembly line." I knew exactly what happened. AeroCorp was Sterling's most demanding client, always with just-in-time delivery needs. They relied on me to perform miracles. Brent Jr. had no miracles to offer. He had an algorithm. I imagined him staring at a screen, unable to comprehend why his optimized system was failing. The shipment was stuck because Kenji couldn't find any container space for Sterling on the last vessel, and Maria's trucks were all booked to move it from the port. The problem wasn't the system, the problem was him. Over the next 3 weeks, the chaos escalated. Sterling's on-time delivery rate, which had been a consistent 99.7% under my management, plummeted to below 80%. Their freight costs skyrocketed. Without my negotiated rates, they were paying market price, and the market was ruthless. They were forced to use freight brokers who gouged them for every container, every pallet, every mile. I heard Brent Jr. tried to call Maria personally. She had her dispatcher tell him she was in a meeting. He emailed Kenji, who replied with a polite, formal message saying he would look into it. David Chen simply stopped responding to his emails altogether. The human firewall was up. Access denied. AeroCorp was losing an estimated $1.2 million per day for their halted assembly line. Their contract with Sterling Global was worth $85 million a year. It contained a strict on-time delivery clause, a clause I had warned Brent Sr. about years ago. They were in breach of contract, and I knew their COO, a man named Marcus Thorne. I'd worked with him for years, pulling off logistical feats to keep his assembly lines moving. My new boss at Apex gave me his blessing. I called Marcus. 3 weeks after I had walked out of Sterling Global, my phone rang. The caller ID said Brent Sterling Sr. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Owen Harper. His voice was strained, the usual bluster gone, replaced by a thin veneer of panic. "Owen, we need to talk. What the hell is going on with our vendors? Maria, Kenji, they're not taking our calls. AeroCorp is about to sue us into oblivion. You have to fix this." The arrogance was astonishing. He didn't ask, he demanded, as if I still worked for him, as if I owed him something. "Fix it?" I replied, my voice level. "I don't work for you anymore, Brent. I'll pay you, he said, the words tumbling out. A consulting fee. $50,000. Just get them back on board. Smooth things over. $50,000. He was trying to buy back 28 years of loyalty and a lifetime of relationships for the price of a mid-range luxury sedan. It was insulting, but it was also the opening I needed. I'll meet you, I said. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The conference center at the Marriott by the airport. And Brent, bring your son. I arrived at the Marriott at 9:45 a.m. With me was my new boss, the CEO of Apex Logistics, Robert Evans. We sat in the reserved conference room, a sterile space with a pitcher of water and a bowl of stale mints. The Sterlings, father and son, walked in precisely at 10, Chateau. They looked terrible. Brent Sr.'s face was pale and drawn. Brent Jr.'s expensive suit was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. The cocksure smirk was gone, replaced by a sullen pout. They saw Robert Evans and were visibly confused. They thought this was a private shakedown. Brent Sr. started talking before he even sat down. He laid out the disaster in excruciating detail. The AeroCorp contract was on the verge of termination. Two other major clients, MedTech Solutions and PowerGrid Inc., had put them on formal notice due to missed shipments. Their supply chain wasn't just disrupted, it was shattered. He reiterated his offer. $50,000, Owen. Just make the calls. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding with the new management. I let him finish. I let the desperation hang in the air. I looked from the father to the son. Brent Jr. wouldn't meet my gaze. He was staring at a water stain on the ceiling. He was a child who had broken his father's most expensive toy and had no idea how to fix it. I let the silence stretch for a full 30 seconds. Then I slowly pushed a single, thin folder across the polished table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Brent Sr. I'm not here as a consultant, Brent, I said, my voice calm and clear, and I won't be making any calls on your behalf. He opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page. The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He handed the document to his son, whose hands were visibly shaking as he read it. It was a letter of intent, signed by Marcus Thorne, the COO of AeroCorp. It detailed their intention to terminate their $85 million annual logistics contract with Sterling Global, citing multiple breaches of contract. The letter named Apex Logistics as their new exclusive provider, effective in 30 days. Your termination notice from AeroCorp's legal department was sent by courier about an hour ago, I stated matter-of-factly. It should be arriving at your office right about now. As of this morning, Apex has also secured the contracts for MedTech Solutions, worth $32 million, and PowerGrid Inc., for $19 million. We did it by guaranteeing them the one thing you can no longer provide: reliability. A supply chain that works. Brent Sr. looked up from the paper, his eyes wide with disbelief. How? He whispered. How could you do this? I didn't do anything, I said, leaning forward. You did. You and your son. You thought my network was a company asset you could manage with an algorithm. You sent out an email that disrespected every single partner who made your company run. You replaced trust with a vendor portal. I just provided an alternative. A place where their loyalty and hard work would be appreciated. Where their invoices would be paid in 15 days, not 90. Robert Evans, my boss, spoke for the first time. His voice was firm. The relationships Owen built are the most valuable asset in this industry. You didn't value them. We do. Maria Rodriguez, Kenji Tanaka, and David Chen have all signed exclusive partnership agreements with Apex. We now control the supply lanes your company depends on. The weapon wasn't just my departure. It was the careful, systematic transfer of the entire ecosystem I had built. Sterling Global wasn't just losing an employee. They were losing their entire operational backbone. They were a hollow shell. and I had just sold the contents to their biggest competitor. Brent Jr. finally spoke, his voice cracking. This is unethical. I almost laughed. Unethical? I looked him dead in the eye. Was it unethical when you took a job you didn't earn? Was it unethical when you ignored my 28 years of experience and changed a shipping route that resulted in a $500,000 cargo loss when a truck tipped over on I-80 last week? No, Brent. This isn't unethical. This is a consequence. This is the data-driven result you're so fond of. There was nothing left to say. I had dictated the terms before the meeting even began. There was no negotiation. There was only the quiet, brutal finality of their defeat. We stood up to leave. Brent Sr. just sat there, staring at the contract, a relic from a company he had already lost. The aftermath was swift and total. Sterling Global stock, which had been trading at $58 a share the day I left, fell to under $20 within a month as news of the lost contracts became public. The board of directors panicked. Brent Jr. was fired 2 weeks after our meeting. There was no golden parachute. He was made the public scapegoat for the company's collapse. The last I heard, he was trying to launch a luxury dog walking business in a gated community, another passion project funded by what was left of his father's money. Brent Sr. was forced into a deeply ungraceful retirement 6 months later. The board brought in a turnaround specialist, but it was too late. The damage was done. The company posted a quarterly loss of $27.3 million. A year later, Sterling Global Solutions, the company I had poured my life into, was acquired by a massive international conglomerate for pennies on the dollar. They bought the warehouses and the trucks. The name, the Sterling legacy, was erased from the building. Brent Sr.'s personal stock in the company, once valued at over $14 million, was worth less than $800,000 after the fire sale. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. The conglomerate that acquired the remnants of Sterling Global needed a logistics partner to manage their new broken assets. Their North American division put out a bid. Apex Logistics won the contract. So now I run the logistics for my old company's facilities. I walk through the same warehouses, but now I do it as a partner, an owner. I see the same people working the docks, the same drivers I've known for years. The only difference is that now the profits they generate flow to a company that values them, a company that values me. My life is different now. My stake in Apex Logistics has made me wealthier than I ever would have been at Sterling. But the real profit isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in time. I'm home for dinner every night. I haven't missed a soccer game or a school play since I left. Last month, for our 20th anniversary, I took my wife to Italy for 2 weeks. I turned my phone off for the entire trip. The world didn't fall apart. My team handled it because I built a team based on competence and trust, not nepotism. In the end, this was never about just revenge. It was about respect. It was a lesson in value. A company's true worth isn't in its buildings or its brand. It's in its people and the relationships they build. Loyalty, as it turns out, is a two-way street. When you treat it like a one-way dead end, don't be surprised when you find yourself completely, utterly, and professionally alone. Competence always, eventually, beats credentials. And patience, backed by a lifetime of carefully cultivated relationships, is the most powerful weapon of all. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you spending your time here. If you enjoyed this story about a quiet operator getting his due, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.